I'm Patricia Thane, co-founder of Private AI, and this is the Data Frontier podcast. Here we explore the frontier of data innovation, where unstructured data meets real-world applications. Each episode brings together builders, engineers, data scientists, product leaders, and domain experts who are shaping the future of intelligence systems. From NLP and privacy to interoperability and AI-driven workflows, we unpack the tools, challenges, and breakthroughs, transforming raw data into smarter systems, faster insights, and better solutions. Adeel, thanks so much for joining us today at the Data Frontier podcast. Could you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. First of all, my name's Adeel Malik. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Clearstep. We started the company late 2018, so 7 or so years ago. And what Clearstep does is we work with big health systems on ensuring that their patients are able to navigate, book, schedule with the optimal providers across these really complex networks and ensure that the hospital systems themselves and medical groups are able to make the best use of their scarce clinical resources. So we've been at it for 7 or so years. I have learned a lot and excited for this conversation because I think right now we're at the space in general and ClearStep and the way health systems are thinking about AI navigation and AI more embedded into their operations of how people access care. We're at a really interesting moment and inflection point for the industry. So yeah, excited to get into it.
Brilliant. What I think is really cool about Clearstep is you base it on gold standards that actual nurses use, things like the Schmitt clinical content. Can you tell us a bit about these gold standards that you base your technology on and why it's important?
Yeah, well, I think in today's world of Gen AI and LLMs, it's still very important and very foundational to our work. But even when we started the company, our first thought was, well, we're trying to solve triage and navigation. How does this currently work, for health systems? And how do they manage the ambiguity that exists when patients are trying to figure out what do they do? Is this an emergency? Is it not? You obviously don't want people just walking into the ER all the time. So how are they solving this? And we realized that there are these nurse call centers that pretty much everyone uses. They contract with them or they have their own nurses. And it's often a phone number on the back of our insurance cards even. And people don't even know about them really, but they get a lot of volume, these nurse call centers. And so the way traditionally that health systems and payers have dealt with this is they stood up these nurse lines. And so you could talk to a nurse. But we learned early on that, well, these nurse lines are actually not just, the nurses aren't just freestyling it. They're actually following trusted protocols because, I mean, you talk about risk of uncertainty with AI. Health systems have been concerned about risk of uncertainty with variations in nurses themselves and the advice that they'll give them. So in the 80s and 90s, these protocols called the Schmitt Thompson protocols started, well, initially just Schmitt, and then they became Schmitt Thompson. They started growing in popularity because they offered these standardized, gold standard, structured protocols for telephonic nurse-based triage. And we discovered those and basically just started trying to build a relationship with the authors of them. And eventually, I mean, long story short there, we struck a relationship with Dr. Barton Schmitt, one of the co-authors, to be able to take his triage protocols and guidelines and makes them as the foundation for our conversational AI and NLP and patient-facing triage. So not clinical algorithms to facilitate nurses going through, but patient facing. And if you look at these protocols are broadly established as the gold standard. Every health system, everyone who runs contact call center in the world of healthcare, they know what these are. They're trusted. They're published by the AMA. Everyone regards them as the gold standard. And frankly, in the world of AI, we think they were just the best kept secret that people didn't realize, I think, that this existed when we did. So we were able to strike these really unique partnerships and get access to these. And ClearStep owns, all its IP. We're not just licensing that content. We actually got rights to be able to transform it, derive it, turn it into. So So we've built systems around that. And I think even in today's world, that was always a boon for us because we're the only AI company that you can work with to be able to use the same clinical logic that you trust, that you know your chief medical officer trusts in the call center, and put it out to patients for them to be able to navigate and use. And even today, that's really important. Everyone's really concerned about hallucination risk. Even a 90% accuracy rate with an LLM is not even close to accurate enough. And we're not even there. Well, I mean, there have been studies that have shown how good is AI. It's very convincing sounding for sure on what you need to do. But there's various studies that the actual accuracy rate of the triage is 70, 80%. And that's going to get better. Like that LLMs will, foundational models will get extremely good at it. But right now, when you're talking about selling software to enterprises, at least for the next couple of years, I think, 2, 3 years at least, I think there's going to be a significant risk aversion to not having some at the core expert system or supervisory agent system that can really ensure that you're not introducing risk in the way you're navigating patients. So that clinical rigor and accuracy has always been at the heart of what we do and continues to kind of be, I think, one of our differentiators in the way we position.
So, in a way, do these standards limit the search space in which the AI can play?
It's a good question. I mean, inherently, it's going to always, right? If you have something that is a structured set of clinical algorithms, and you're tying, we built rags around this so that you can still have some of the benefits of the conversationality, the adaptability, the ability to kind of adjust the way that the content is delivered. But at the end of the day, you can't break the content, you can't break the rules. So yes, but the real question is, what's the extent of those limitations? What's the trade-off of those limitations? And for us, well, we've basically encoded what are thousands of years of evolution of clinical best practice medicine. And so do you want an LLM to kind of recreate that from what's on the internet holistically, or do you want to take what are just like, that crushing chest pain that's a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale? Like, there are thousands of combinations of rules like this that doctors just know. Those are established fact. You don't want any risk in X plus Y plus Z equals this outcome at all. The breadth of what we're covering does encompass, we've done studies. I mean, over 99% of stuff that patients can walk into the ER with, we can cover with the kind of AI. So that less than 1%, maybe you'll need to escalate to a human or get a human in the loop for part of it, feels like a reasonable trade-off, or you can trust what it's going to say the rest of the time.
How hard was that encoding process?
Pretty challenging. In fact, the way that we really think about our differentiation is more a level up from what I was saying as, like, oh, it's just about these nurse triage guidelines. I mean, it is, that's important, but we are the best at ensuring that an AI system is clinically robust and rigorous. And we have built internal tooling and systems that really allow for that. We've probably the thing that to answer your question, it was really hard because what we did when we initially got access to the content is we built a whole clinical intelligence building system. It's not really a branded thing, it's our internal tooling that we use, but we have a team of over a dozen clinicians, emergency medicine docs, internal med docs, physician assistants, NPs that constantly work on refining our content and those algorithms. We didn't just take what they had and quote unquote transform it. It was way more intensive than that. And so we have this amazing internal system where you can like visualize clinical logic, and they're not decision trees, they're like knowledge graphs, they're like complex webs of logic that flows from one node to the other. And so you can visualize that, you can then see how it presents to patients, you can tie clinical concepts to it, like clinical vocabularies and ontologies to it, you can test logical phrases through it. There's so much functionality that we basically built into it the concept of unit testing into our clinical logic. So you basically have the core library, and then you have a whole other library of essentially unit tests that are independently and separately made that have every phrase of logic, like X symptom plus Y symptom equals this for sure, 100% of the time. This rule will never break, no matter what. We have thousands of test cases like that. So basically, what happens is anytime any updates are made to our core clinical library, all those unit tests are run against the whole thing to make sure that no logic has broken for what we know is just truth for how symptoms should be treated in specific combinations of symptoms. So it's really robust, and it's all this functionality is why Clearstep has been trusted by the biggest brands in healthcare, by the biggest name health systems like Baylor Scott and White and Mount Sinai and Ochsner and HCA and the US military to actually deploy patient-facing AI that's sitting in front of patients and telling them, okay, this is what's going on. This is what you need to do as your next step. And they trust it because of all of this rigor that's built in. So it took a while before we were able to launch that product. I mean, we were really full-time in the weeds building it for 18 months in a really focused way. And then since then, we have continuously evolved that system that our clinicians use. We have continued to build and refine the content to expand it. So very intensive efforts definitely have been made around this.
That's really cool. I imagine that that would also allow you to innovate much more quickly or test things out much more quickly since you have that base.
Definitely. I mean, it's our North Star is not speed alone, it's speed and accuracy,
Mhm.
speed and clinical rigor. And so could you go faster by prompting an LLM to try to create something similar? Yeah, probably that's faster even now than what we have. But we have all these layers of, okay, you can look and know that, okay, this is tested, this is validated. EM docs have looked at this and been like, yep, that we agree. Like, so it's the balance there. So given that we are that clinically rigorous, yes, I think we can move the fastest in that context of being clinical rigorous because we have all this tooling that's built up.
That's brilliant. Are there any other standards that you built upon?
There's various things like with depressive screening, PHQ-9. There are existing other standards that we pull in. I'm not the best to speak very specifically to what those are. The core are those nurse triage protocols, but then we'll do medical literature reviews and make sure we're pulling in the latest into the whole content set.
Okay. So you've got these standard encodings, you've got a bunch of unit tests that are really robust for clinical accuracy, you've got the right ontologies and such. But when you're in the patient's shoes and
Mhm.
they're, the same way that you'd browse WebMD and start
Right.
worrying about rare disease, I can imagine that the wrong interface might cause a lot of anxiety for the patient.
Mm.
How do you deal with that?
Mm. Very good question. I mean, the very simple answer is we continue to iterate on the best UX to do what we had talked about before, but the fastest, most efficient, streamlined encounter to get someone from point A to point B while being clinically robust. That's kind of the North Star, even with our user experiences. And Clearstep has been used millions of times. It's on its web, basically patient facing chat experience. But it is interesting, even the way we have chat right now is it's pretty it feels deterministic, meaning the start is free text, but then we kind of guide patients through, we know what questions we need to ask them after that. But it is in contrast to how we use AI now with LLMs, at least what is currently the main UX that's live. And to be frank, I don't think that is the end all be all. We are evolving and growing that UX. We've internally been doing a lot of testing around even making our digital experience a lot more conversational and allowing for more conversation back and forth. The challenge actually becomes if you make our triage engine work the way an LLM works, where it really is just conversational back and forth, what we've seen initially is it takes way longer to get to the end, or at least more mental energy. So it depends how long the messages are from the person. I mean, then if they're writing long messages, maybe it's not longer in terms of actual back and forth because they gave us a lot of information in like 2 paragraphs or something. But it takes a lot more mental energy to go that way, where we're not just prompting. It's like, because if you tell us, oh, the main thing that's going on is I've been having a migraine for a week, because of the way Clearstep works, we know the questions we need to ask you. So we're going to ask you those questions in a multiple choice way. And then we're going to be able to really, in 2 minutes, which is roughly our average encounter time, we're going to get you to what your next step should be with scheduling options and this kind of thing. But like you said, people like going down rabbit holes, and you give the WebMD type experience where you're just back and forth for a long time. So if you actually make it overly conversational, it can just take longer and require more effort of the person to get there. Now, maybe that's worth it because maybe people feel more invested and bought in, and they'll actually take the next step that you want. So these are the kinds of questions we're asking ourselves, continue to ask ourselves as we iterate on the next gen versions of the UX, because we don't think that, to be honest, what is currently the main UX that's live for Clearstep is the UX that's going to be, the winning UX over the next 5 years. Voice is one component of that too. We have a voice agent version of this. There are different questions to think about and answer when you think of what that UX should look like. But that one has actually been, interestingly, a little bit more straightforward than figuring out how to bring that kind of experience to digital and evolve the digital experience in managing the conversation. We kind of just have the agent really just always be directing the conversation and the follow-up questions towards this like pathway that we know we need it to go on. But it's a good question. We're continuing to iterate, and I think that we'll learn some really interesting things even over the next 6 months as we really evolve the user experiences here.
Makes sense. And so this triage process, which I believe you call the smart care routing process.
Yeah, smart care routing. We use that language. Yeah.
Smart care routing. Would you say that this is the main missing piece of the patient journey?
Mm, yes, actually, I would. And at least for when someone is experiencing symptoms, whether they're new or they've been kind of recurring and needs to access the healthcare system. In that context, yes, I think this is the piece that's missing. And people have been talking, people know for ages, it's like, yes, we need to ensure that patients are using the right care at the right time in the right place, that people who really need to go to the ED are doing so, that people can do a virtual visit, that they're doing that. And frankly, what's interesting is in both fee for service and risk-based contexts or value-based contexts, everyone wants this. It actually helps drive both revenue incentives and margin incentives in both contexts. You want to use your clinical resources most effectively, and it's because there's scarcity with them. So both pair contexts drive this like right care, right time kind of concept, but it's hard to operationalize it and really make sure. And that's why people have tried different things. It's like these nurse triage call centers, but like I would say usage of them is declining overall. People, I mean, we probably don't want to have to call a number like that and have this like, kind of older feeling experience to access and care. Self-service is kind of the name of the game. And then there's this whole world where health systems have these like pretty kludgy processes from a technology perspective, how they currently try to manage this with their scheduling system. So like most big health systems use, Epic to run scheduling as well for providers. And in Epic, you can build these like decision trees that are meant to qualify patients and ensure that like the right visit types are booked, meaning the right length of appointment on the right provider's time. And even when you call a health system, usually the call center agent is like going down these decision trees to like ask you some questions to figure out like which cardiologist do I book you with and how long does that appointment need to be? What's the appointment type that I need to set to query the slots? And all these things are in effort to qualify the patient and ensure they're accessing the right level of care. We just think that the current systems, the current ways in which people are trying to do this are not the ways of the future. And why we see and we know that things need to change is the data supports it. Like the current system is just not working. And this is why we feel, I mentioned at the very beginning, that we feel like we're in a really unique moment. And it's because there's a lot of awareness around how broken these systems and technologies and processes are for trying to qualify care before it gets in. And there's a lot of open-mindedness to how do we do this differently than the way we've been doing it before. And I'll just mention some data points that support what I'm saying, which is that you often see this phenomenon with health systems, and we think from the lens of big health systems. That's who we work with. It's different from the two doc private practice. Like it's much different. We think in the lens of the Mount Sinai's of the world, and the Bill Scott and Whites in the world. But in those contexts, you often see this really weird phenomenon where average appointment lead time is like 25 days, let's say. But then if you look at overall provider utilization, you'll see it's like 85%, 90%. So you're basically saying that on any given day, there is actually 15% availability across the system, but people are waiting 30 days when they book a new appointment. And part of the reason for that is the way these really static decision trees can like hide capacity. Actually, it's this really complicated problem actually to be able to unlock it. But if you're a health system where you feel like you're full, your patients are booking 30 days out, but you're leaving inventory on the table every day, it's the numbers are unreal. I mean, for a system the size of like Ochsner $7 billion system, a 5% increase to take provider utilization from 85 to 90% is worth like $300 million to the company. So it's to the organization. So it's huge numbers. It needs to be fixed. And then the other part of this is even that 85% that's utilized, 35 to 40% of it is inefficiently utilized. You have patients sitting in front of a urologist who really just needed to go to urgent care. You have all of these mismatches that are like 30% of the slots that are getting full. So there's this huge opportunity both for patient outcomes and for revenue optimization to ensure that you are playing matchmaker more sophisticatedly. So long answer to your simple question of like, is this the missing thing? It is the missing thing, but it's really hard to actually figure out, well, how do you get this right to like really always play matchmaker in an omni-channel way, whether someone calls or uses my chart or the mobile app or just walks in for care. How do you make sure that you're actually controlling the care pathways of patients?
Do you want to show us a demo of how this works live?
Sure, that'd be great. And
I imagine also if nurses are handling a lot of these call volumes and there's always a dearth of nurses, this frees up more personnel to actually be hands-on.
absolutely, that's and so we think, and frankly, we think Clearstep is hopefully the reason why. But nurse triage call centers are going away. They're not going to last. And it's one of those examples of call center disruption that we think from a labor force perspective is really positive in the net and at a macro level. There's actually data on not nurses, but the US has like 3 million jobs of people working in call centers, back centers, something like that. That's a big problem, actually, from a macro perspective. Where are those jobs going to go? Because those are, I think, pretty confidently things that are not clinical and not complicated like this. Like those will be replaced. Those will go away. Even with the nurse triage, I don't actually know the total number of jobs there, but the reality is we have major nurse shortages in the country. So we shouldn't be using this extremely scarce resource that really should be on the front lines of care, helping deliver care, helping manage patients, to just be sitting in a call center answering phone calls all day. So this is one of the examples where it's like a really net positive thing in every way to get these jobs handled by AI.
Beauty.
Yeah. So, all right, I'll share my screen here. So this is an example of like how Clearstep today surfaces to patients. If you go to Mount Sinai and you're on their Get Care page, you can either go down the Get Care for your symptoms or the Find Care Now path. And if you go down this path, this is now a Clearstep experience and interface. You can describe your symptoms. And like I said, this is where you have that free text, say whatever you want. People do write paragraphs in here and we can just, determine what the clinical concepts are, parse it out. But you can kind of see once we parse out, it's like sore throat, fever, but you may have noticed too, we actually said, okay, cold symptoms. Sometimes people just like in general have cold symptoms. And what's interesting is it doesn't really matter. It's not sure which one is bothering you the most. This helper text is like, just pick one, basically, because we're going to make sure we ask you the right questions no matter what. And from here, it is deterministic. Now, again, it's not exactly a decision tree in the background. It's more like we're ruling out pathways. So we'll always ask the more severe questions first. If you do write chest pain up there, and within 2 questions, if it's an emergency, we'll know, and we're gonna route you to an ER. So the less acute your symptoms are, the longer this encounter is likely going to be, because we're continuously trying to rule out about this, what about that should the patient do. But we always prioritize getting to a triage as fast as possible, especially for the acuity. So on average, it's 12 questions, just pretty quick. Now you're at a next step. You get a recommendation on the kind of care within what period of time that you should get it. You get multiple fulfillment options that are intelligently ranked of what really the best thing is for you to do. You can select your insurance, and we'll update the options. As a result, if you put in just even a zip code here, like we have these live integrations where we're actually pulling slots. These are right now, today. At 2 o'clock, I could go book this appointment at Mount Sinai down the street from me right now. And so boom, from the point of, I'm not sure what to do. Great. Here's what you should do. You should either start a virtual visit, which is actually the best option for you. Or if you want to go in person, then here are slots. You can actually select the slot and book the appointment, put in your information, and book the appointment with this provider. And then there's also a bunch of educational information, when you should seek medical care immediately. So this stuff especially really satisfies the people prone to just digging down WebMD rabbit holes. It's like, great, here's the information you actually need to know for the symptoms that you have, besides what we already shared with you, OTC medications, going to school or work. So this is, and I would say this has been our traditional UX for a couple years now. But frankly, because of all of the innovation in UX and how patients use AI and AI chat, there has been a big focus of ours on rethinking this UX. And frankly, I don't believe that this will be the main UX of Clearstep for maybe even that long. I think that voice is the big frontier of using this kind of information to navigate and guide patients, whether that's inbound to a system or outbound calls to patients to navigate them. But yeah, this is kind of the core product. I'll actually show one other thing, which is super cool. So we recently launched this experience with Ochsner Health, where basically they came to us and they were like, hey, we have this problem where we've hired so many junior APPs to work in our urgent cares, that they had concerns that providers weren't going down strong, consistent, standardized care pathways when patients come in. And so they asked us to help bring our clinical reasoning engine that's kind of powering what we just saw to a slightly different use case. And overall, I would say this is the theme of Clearstep, that we've realized that really our core differentiator is that clinical reasoning engine. And there are 5 or 6 different use cases that we are now powering with that are in addition to what you just saw, but it is all about that core logic. So what's happening here, actually, by the time this launches, by the end of today, we're launching a brand new website with brand new positioning. And so listeners to this will be able to see that and see kind of what I've been alluding to too, as how we're capitalizing on this moment. But this use case is really interesting. So basically what happens is patient walks into an urgent care, and the front desk staff, a medical assistant who's not clinical, basically uses a version of what we just saw of Clearstep, which is they say, why are you here, patient? And they kind of write it up. They get prompted if there's follow-up questions. But then instead of going to a triage page like we saw at the end of that result, they basically come to here with one caveat. If we determine in that interaction that this patient should go to an emergency room and they are not appropriate for urgent care, we'll notify the MA that they should bring a provider to the front desk immediately to assess the patient and determine if they need to go to ER. This is a big problem at urgent cares, because it often happens that a patient will wait, they'll get roomed 40 minutes after they show up. The provider will see them and be like, oh, we got to call an ambulance. You got to go to the ER. Huge risk, for huge liability concerns for an urgent care. This is so, and only we are capable of doing this because we have the clinical reasoning, and we can shunt those patients out immediately. And there's already been amazing stories of that happening at the urgent cares we're working with. But assuming it's not an emergency case, which is 95% plus of the use cases, they get a summary of an HPI at the outset, they get a differential, but most importantly, we're predicting what diagnostic tests are going to be needed for this patient based on their symptoms. So what if they're going to need a urinalysis, like in this case, a pregnancy test, the provider may want to consider gonorrhea, chlamydia testing. But what's interesting is there's these two tiers of confidence, essentially. These ones that were like basically extremely confident about that this patient is going to need these tests. The MA just orders these. This is happening right now, live today at Ochsner Urgent Cares. The MA just ordering these exams in the EMR. And so essentially what's happening by the time the provider sees the patient, they have in Epic, in this case, the HPI already written that if they have ambience, then the ambient AI scribe can start off of this and then expand. They have a differential that they should be considering. And then they have the results back from these tests that were already ordered from the front desk, and then they should consider whether they do these additional tests as well. So this is a really cool example of like extending beyond just that initial triage into the actual clinical workflow, supporting clinical decision making, and to solve Ochsner's original problem, ensuring that providers are ordering tests and then making sure they're considering the right differentials as they see patients in a much more standardized way. So this is a super cool use case. And the last point I'll make too is this is the foundation for a capability that we are really, really bullish about, where we think in the next 5 years, you should be able to just talk to an AI that is able to determine, yeah, you're going to need a urinalysis, or like you're going to need this kind of blood test, or you're going to need this x-ray, because what's going to happen is you're going to go see the provider and they're just going to say, well, I need those tests to do anything now, to prescribe you anything, to know what the next step is. And an AI should be able to just order the lab test, order the urinalysis, especially when it's super confident that that's what's going to, because how many visits happen where you go and the doc's basically like, great, get this blood test, and then I'll call you, and or we'll come back for another visit to talk about it. So there will come a point where an AI will have an MPI, will have malpractice insurance against it, and we'll just order these. You'll go to Quest, you'll get the results, it'll be uploaded, and you'll get on a virtual visit with your doctor, and you get rid of one whole visit essentially that happens there. So that's coming. We're pursuing that in a variety of ways, and we think we have the prerequisite foundational technology to even make that a reality and get the FDA approvals and go through the clinical trials, because that's what it'll take to actually do this. But this would be like revolutionary for healthcare globally if you can just get lab tests imaging ordered by talking to an AI.
That'd for sure save a lot of time. So that can happen when the AI is very confident. How do you deal with more ambiguous cases?
Well, right now, I mean, this won't always be populated, for example. Like, sometimes there won't be anything in this section. There will just be stuff in this section, vice versa. Sometimes both will be blank if we don't think any diagnostics are needed. And this use case just launched in one urgent care in October, and then we expanded to 3 urgent cares with Ochsner in December. So we're pretty early in understanding how this really aligns and doesn't, and we're still like measuring a lot of the value and impact, but it was already valuable enough clearly that we added more urgent cares with them towards the end of last year. So we'll have a lot more data, and probably even a month or two here to really think about how this continues to evolve. But yeah,
Okay.
that's where we are right now.
So to automatically book tests, that there's quite a few hurdles that you have to go through. What about things like automatically negotiating an appointment slot or handling insurance pre-authorization all without clicking anything? What would that look like? And do you have these the underlying capabilities to make those happen?
Yeah, I mean, we're already doing the appointment slot side. I mean, you saw the basic example of. I'll stop sharing now. But you saw the basic example of querying an appointment slot. And one thing that we're working on right now, and actually there are a couple companies just focused on doing exactly this. We may just partner around doing it, but right now to do that like Mount Sinai like booking experience for primary care, we've built the heavy duty integrations into the actual scheduling experience to be able to do that. And we think that one, it's not always straightforward. So never straightforward, frankly, to build those integrations. There's a lot of unique things about every setup. There's the whole, what are your templates and decision trees look like that we need to then integrate with. And we think there are quicker ways, like having an AI just look at your GCal, make the phone call, even when we're not integrated in. We know what kind of appointment we need, and AI just goes back and forth with the call center agent to actually book the slot because it knows your GCal and will just book the slot on it. So we don't have that live yet, but we aren't far away from being able to do that. That's definitely a this year thing. We'll do basic insurance eligibility matching right now. Even you saw that drop down. I didn't actually select it, but you can drop down, select your insurance and your plan, and then we'll make sure that at least for your visit, that for just an initial outpatient visit, that is going to be with an in-network provider based on your plan. But we are going to enter this phase, I think, this year of then having to deal with more complicated scenarios where we already know that this is going to require some level of procedural care that will then result in a prior auth being needed. Usually that case doesn't happen at the initial part of the patient journey, that like you need a prior auth for your first, which is where we're mainly focused around that initial matching. But as we continue to go downstream of that and managing, you know, booking your follow-up care after an initial visit, that's definitely then where prior auth will start to enter the equation of, okay, well, in order to do that, especially if it's a procedural thing, often there is a prior auth and having to do that. So we haven't built there yet, but it is something that is on the roadmap as we are trying to go downstream of the initial match.
And do you have access to information like is the ER at this particular hospital full, for example?
Yes, not always, but sometimes. So, with our HCA instances, we haven't done anything super special around that. They have an API endpoint that they actually built that's plugged into their EMR, that they put a lot of effort into actually standardizing across the system, where like you can hit an endpoint uh, and get back live wait times at their ERs. And so we'll use that as an input into how we're directing, or which ER, like if someone's in the middle of there are two HCA ERs that are 20 minutes away, then, but one is packed and one is not, we can then use that information to make sure they're routed to the right one. We're not standing up those kinds of APIs though. So like, at least not yet. So if you're not offering that, if you haven't done some legwork internally around exposing things like wait times to external systems, then we're not going to be able to grab that, at least for live, like for ERs and urgent cares, where it's just a live stream of patients. Obviously we can do that when it's a booked appointment because we can look at the calendar, ahead of time and make sure. But it's a great use case when it's available, and Epic does make it somewhat available with like wait times for urgent cares. But sometimes certain systems don't expose these things very easily to external systems. Has been one of the challenges in making this a baseline capability for everyone.
Makes sense. But when you do have access to that data, you do automatically do some load balancing
Yes,
there.
exactly.
Got it. Deal with the symptoms that are input into the chat window, because this is some of the most sensitive data that people are sharing with you. How do you handle HIPAA compliance, data security? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, I mean, our standard approach is that we have some HI scanning that happens, and I don't actually know the details of it. We're going to actually continue that conversation separately with private AI. But we do have some capability built in there where we'll monitor the free text for anything that is PHI that they're dropping in there, and then basically flag it. So if like you write your SSN or something and there's an error message that will come up and you can't proceed. So unless you remove it, and same in our feedback modals where there's just open text ability to write things, we'll try to flag when someone's writing PII or PHI, because we don't want to store and associate that in a way that it's not meant to be. So our ideal path and our preference is that every interaction in terms of how it's stored is anonymized and de-identified. And so we don't, even in the way just our databases are living, that they're not compromised with information that shouldn't be in there. So we try to detect it at the outset and just refuse to advance the conversation. Now that is becoming increasingly complex. and handle a lot more authenticated patients now that are accessing it from within their portals. But even still, from a Clearstep perspective, we try to set up data flows where we'll pass an identifier to the system that is just like a UUID, that they have the association for, that UUID ties to this patient and this MRN, but we will always drop it. But then they'll have some mapping so that they can tie back to who these patients were. But we always will prefer to store our data in ways where we're not actually tying to the individual person. Again, that's going to change, and we're going to need to be even more thoughtful about how we're doing this. I mean, voice makes it even more complicated, actually, because a lot more information is just coming out from the patient as they're walking through things. And then you have your phone number. But even so, as we store those, we're trying to strip everything of anything that's identifiable. So that's kind of been our thing so far. And we're set up, we are compliant in these ways, SOC 2 and HIPAA. We've gone through all the processes and hoops to ensure that we are employing best practices for data security and how we're managing PHI. But even despite that, we prefer to just never store it and to just always be dropping it when we do have to deal with it. So yeah, that's kind of the current thinking. And y'all are even deeper in the space, and I'm excited to continue learning together how to make sure that this super important area that can take down companies is something that we and the industry are being as mindful as possible about.
That's always great to hear. And I'm sure because of all of the enterprise deployments you've done, like with Tufts Medicine, for example, you've got security really honed down.
Yeah.
In those enterprise deployments, you're also dealing with a huge patient population with real world data. Is there anything that in those deployments has really surprised you about what you found? Anything that you didn't expect?
Yes. We, people, I think doctors in particular know and have this impression, and I think people in general know that patients often get it wrong. They don't know where they should actually go for care. But something that's really interesting is we've done this analysis a variety of times, and recently we did it again, where for a random subset of our users, we'll ask them before they see Clearstep results and what Clearstep says is the next thing, what they were planning on doing for their care. And so we'll classify their pre-intent in that way, and we'll compare their pre-intent with Clearstep's recommendation and then what they actually did. And there have been some really interesting findings from that. First of all, it ranges by health system deployment, but something like only 10 to 20% of patients who are using Clearstep will even endorse that they're unsure. One of the options is I'm unsure, right? What's your pre-intent? I don't know. That's why I'm here, right? But only 10 to 20% of people even using Clearstep will be like, I'm unsure. The rest will state, this is what I'm planning on doing. I'm planning on going to the ER. I'm planning on doing a virtual visit. Or I'm planning on talking to my primary care about this. Or I'm planning on trying to book a cardiology appointment for this. So we grab that. So like 80 to 90% of patients, even though they're using a triage tool, are saying, I know what I want to do. And then those that selected a pre-intent, the data shows that like 70% of them were wrong. 70%. Unbelievable. And we've done it multiple times across multiple instances, and they're either too acute or not acute enough. You have a lot of examples of people saying, and most of the time we're de-escalating. So of that 70%, most of the time it's de-escalating. Most of the time it's someone saying urgent care or ER. And if they say ER, we're saying urgent care. And if you're saying urgent care, we're saying you could do a telemedicine visit or just book with your primary care next week. And so it's super interesting. I think the split is like, so of that 70%, it's 70% that were de-escalating and 30% that were escalating. People saying, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to stay at home. And it's like, well, you should at least do a virtual visit, or you actually do need to go to an urgent care right now. Or someone that's saying primary care, and we're saying you should do urgent care. So we're like escalating the care. But we've been floored by those numbers. Where first of all, like we were surprised even that so few patients are even endorsing that they're unsure, despite the fact that they're in like a symptom triage tool. Um, and most of them are saying, yeah, we know what we want to do, but then it's like, well, you're wrong. And then for the 20 some percent that we're validating, where it's like, you said this, yep, that's what you should do. The conversion rates to care are like double. So it's really interesting. It's like we see that, something like 40% of those patients, we can see that they actually book the appointment and they take the next step. And it's roughly half of that will convert when we're basically telling them they're wrong, that they should do X instead of Y. So that's another thing that we take just from a UX perspective. How do we get someone to change their mind, basically, to do something different than what they were initially intending to do? It's definitely a big UX challenge, and how you present information and really guide the process. But even the rates of conversion we're seeing right now are at scale extremely meaningful. If you can say, hey, we're actually redirecting 25% of patients who are going to do the wrong thing to the right thing, like that is really meaningful at scale. But ideally, we want to be as close to 100% of that as possible of redirection.
So of those 70%, when you tell them they're wrong, some of them will still say, I don't care, I want my original plan.
Basically, like most of them, actually. And so, so it's pretty interesting. And the challenge is we don't have all of the data to know the full. So, for example, if we told you urgent care, like you said telemedicine and we said urgent care, but if we're not integrated into like some like on my way checker, we don't always know whether you showed up or not, at least from a Clearstep perspective. So we may be underreporting that, but the data we do have is like 20 some percent of those patients who are rerouting, we can verifiably see that they're then engaging with the care options that we're actually redirecting them to. So it may be that it's another 10, 20% that like are just showing up, we're escalating their care, then they're just doing it. And we haven't actually been able to track that yet, at least. But yes, it is definitely less though than we see from when we validate what they should do in terms of them being able to see from the conversion metrics and the stream data that like they're actually going and taking the next steps.
Do you find that when you need data like that, health systems are pretty open to figuring out how to get you that data?
Everyone's always open to it. Everyone's always like, yes, it makes sense. We should do that. But it's always a matter of like prioritization around it. And will they be able to, and how hard or easy is it? Oftentimes it's like the amount of work they'll need to do to like get that data with us. They're just like not going to allocate the resources to doing, which is definitely a frustrating part. And frankly, we've learned a lot now working with these big health systems for over 5 years. And I think some of the ways we engage moving forward in the future will be different than in the past, that more bake in, some of these kinds of integrate, just make them more non-negotiable, frankly. But
Mm.
you can't just simply posture with health systems as something non-negotiable. You have to understand things more deeply than that, right? You have to understand why are things challenging, and it's not just, oh, that's a non-negotiable. It's more like, no, we need that, and here's exactly how we're going to help you make sure that you can surface that for us. And if you can't do that second part, and frankly, it just takes time working with them in these systems to then know that second part and be able to say, well, this is how you're going to do it. So I think we've built up a lot of know-how over the last couple of years in managing these things that we'll be able to carry that forward in best practices as we move forward to ensure that most of the time we can have the full kind of closed loop uh, data here. But from the beginning, it's been the same. It's actually really interesting. It's a little bit of a side note, but I just happened to come across, someone sent me our Techstars product demo pitch from 2019. And I was both excited and a little dismayed by watching it, because it's so similar to the current vision, like all the step of like how we're trying to qualify care, do the insurance verification, match you, make sure you're booking the optimal. It's so similar. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, it took 5 years basically to get to a point where our partners are actually opening up the systems and the integrations and all the things that we need to just do this to the full end to end that we've been postulating for 5 or 6 years, we've just been banging on the door being like, this, we need to get that data. We need this, and we need to make this as robust as it should be. So that was the dismay part. The part that I was glad about was like, we've been so consistent in what we're pursuing, like in this like mission of right care, right time. And so that's been cool to see. You see way more evolution than that with companies, but the core of what we're trying to accomplish has literally been the same from our like Techstars days in 2019.
Yeah, we're on the same boat.
Yeah.
Same mission from the very beginning at Private AI, and
Yeah.
it really took people wanting to use their data for AI to
Interesting to
yeah,
create the inflection moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, for the inflection. Um,
Yeah.
so when you approach those health systems for those non-negotiables or for more data or anything that you hope will make their lives better, uh, how do you approach the ROI conversation? Does that ROI conversation actually make them open up their minds and
Yeah.
yeah, time more?
Increasingly so. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, I think one of the reasons is why maybe earlier on there was more not reluctance. Again, people look at it and they're like, yeah, obviously that we want that data to close loops and track ROI. But I think part of what happens with like newer, more innovative technologies or ways of doing things is your early customers, your first 10 are already they are innovative enough that like they actually just believe in the philosophy. Like they believe in the core thrust of the product, that they're less concerned with you like needing to like prove every detail of the ROI, because they believe in it. They believe that, yes, we need a better way to qualify patients. We know we're getting enough patient volume through this, that based off of some assumptions you can make in an ROI model, even if there are gaps, you can make some reasonable assumptions. Okay, yeah, this is good enough for us. I think that is often the case with your most innovative early customers. They don't want to have to do a huge amount of work to truly close the loop because they believe in it. But I think there's two things that are changing now, which is one, I think just across the board, there's way more scrutiny on ROI for any new technology coming into particularly health systems. I imagine it's the same on the payer side, but like we primarily work on the health system side. And I think there's just way more scrutiny. Dollars are tighter, margins, are decent, but like expected to not be decent in probably the near future. So people are scrutinous and they want to make sure that things are actually ROI producing. And health systems have now been exposed to technologies, um, certain rev cycle, AI, even ambient to some extent, where the ROI story and the data capture for it has been very embedded in the way implementation is done and data is tracked, that they've been able to see quick implementations that have clear ROI stories that tie to the financials super easily. So now a standard has been set, essentially. This is what's expected, that out of the box, you're going to know which end you're going to do the thing. You're going to embed the technology in such a way that the revenue or cost saving story is abundantly clear. And we're going to build at that. So one, I think a standard has been set even for the more innovative players, where they're less willing to accept theoretical ROI frameworks. And they really want the real contribution margin data on it, not just the framework. And so I think that's happening even with the innovative players. And then two, it's always the trajectory of any innovation as you go from early innovators and early adopters into early majority, that theoretical ROI frameworks stop working in that bridge of the chasm between, I don't know if you've read Crossing the Chasm, but in that chasm, it is all about fully packaging your solution with exactly the data, that's exactly the story, the exact playbook, for the rest of the market, where they are way more ROI sensitive and will need to know my $1 turns into three for sure in accepting to work with you. So I think that now we're in a place too where we are in that phase of growth, I would say, and there being open-mindedness for greater market adoption. And so even from that angle, there is this big thrust of ensuring that everything is packaged in that way to appeal to the buyer and make the buying process a lot easier.
Do you find that they're more receptive to financial metrics-based ROIs or
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
fair enough.
That's it. Like, clinical outcomes is good.
Mhm.
I personally don't know of any. I mean, there probably are. I'm sure there are, but I don't know of any really strong, growing really well companies that are only appealing to clinical outcomes data and ROI. You have to be able to show on the P&L which line items are affected, either from a net increase in revenue or margin or, decrease in cost. Like, you got to be able to speak to that. And so it's very powerful when it's like, hey, here's an amazing clinical outcome and look at what's happening with these kind of patient trajectories, and look at what's happening to margin and
Mm,
revenue. And like, I think it's extremely hard to grow well if you are not able to hit the financial ROI metrics.
makes sense. So one last bonus question for you. If you had a magic wand and you
Yeah.
could build whatever data infrastructure you could for
Mm.
making your life easier, what would that look like?
Ooh. I'm not gonna get too overly technical with it, mostly because I can't. But it's it is a pretty specific domain, but it's the thing that is currently the barrier to what we're trying to do at scale, and it is all of these scheduling decision trees that live in the EMRs that are so static and so kludgy and so hard to maintain. They need to disappear, basically. And we are working on this. There's a big thrust of our current direction to say, hey, that's a way of the past. The way you are managing this is not the way this needs to work anymore. And I think if I could snap my fingers and say, hey, we have now the new paradigm for exactly how that works and how you can just throw away this entire layer of like garbage that lives in the EMR, that you literally, if you're a big system, you spend millions of dollars a year. It's not uncommon for a system the size of like an Ochsner to have 20, 30 FTEs, and all they do is manage these decision trees. That's how big of a problem this is. It's not like some one and done thing. It's millions and millions of dollars in labor that you pay for people to manage this logic. And it's not structured well. It gets in the way of actually using your provider and those stats I was mentioning before. It needs to be re-architected, and we are advancing models right now. We're early, but we are advancing models in how do you actually re-architect this entire layer of decision tree and actually not use decision trees for it, but achieve the goal much better, which fundamentally is about qualifying care. It's about ensuring the right patients access the right care, the right appointment slots, the right provider. So, um, yeah, that's my pretty specific answer. Only people who are in this very niche space of scheduling as it works in big EMRs will even really be able to, I think, appreciate that. But I think I've shared enough that you can resonate a bit.
Yeah, I find that those niche tidbits are the most fun. This has been
Yeah,
great, Adeel. Thanks so much for your time and
it's
for
been
all your
awesome. Thanks so much for having me and hearing me out.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, a quick note about the company I co founded, Private AI. We help organizations use their data safely so they can build compliant AI products, share data securely, and extract insights without the regulatory headaches. If PII, PHI, or PCI data are standing between you and your next innovation, visit private-ai.com. See you next time on the Data Frontier.